Welcome to the debut edition of the Podcast Express. I am your host, Mike, along with my co-host, Joe. Joe, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, man. Excited to be on, get this thing rolling.
Absolutely. We have a big week. We have a lot to cover in the news today. Let's go ahead and get started with Ring of Honor Best in the World this past Friday night. You actually got a chance to watch the entire show, right?
That is correct. Yeah, it was kind of a weird show in a sense where Ring of Honor has been trying to promote Cody, I guess last name redacted, Rhodes, as a heel, but he has just fully gotten over as the face of Ring of Honor. He was cheered the entire time. Everyone is saying, and I pretty much agree, that this has been Cody's best match since leaving WWE, but it was still just a very, very okay match. It came out with a 3 and I think a 3.5 star rating. The big news of that is he will be the face and the main champion of a promotion walking into Saturday's G1 special facing Okada. So that match there sets up a champion versus champion match this Saturday. But my favorite match of the night was Kushida versus Marty Scurll. Did you get to watch that yet?
Oh, no, I have not been able to watch that, man. There's just so much content for me to digest, but I do have it on my computer, and I will be watching it here really, really soon.
Yeah, it was a fantastic match. Probably the match of the night, in my opinion. I believe the Young Bucks match got a little bit higher of a rating, but that's just because I'm not saying Dave Meltzer is biased towards the Young Bucks, but Dave Meltzer's biased towards the Young Bucks. And Kushida versus Marty Scurll, it just tore the house down, man. Absolute physical match. They beat the crap out of each other for about 20 minutes almost. And Marty Scurll is just one of my favorite wrestlers outside of WWE. The guy has a great gimmick, just a great work ethic. He really knows how to tell a story in a match and just get the other guy over. It was fantastic. I'd highly recommend that to anybody.
Well, I'll be definitely watching it really soon. Yeah, I am a huge Marty Scurll fan. I honestly did not know exactly who he was until I believe the last Ring of Honor pay-per-view, and I got to see him come out with that with his outfit, his costume, and that bird mask that he wears, and the whole villain gimmick, and then they introduced him into the Bullet Club. And so, yeah, now I'm on board. I'm fully on board with Marty Scurll, and I will be watching that match here really soon. And I was really shocked at the star rating that Dave gave it today on the Observer. I'm not one of those guys that thinks that he's really biased towards the Young Bucks versus anybody else, but a lot of people were thinking that Kushida versus Marty Scurll was the best match on the show. But then when you look at the Observer today, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the poll results came out, and the top-rated match was the Young Bucks match, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think the Young Bucks, they got a 4.5 star rating, and Scurll got just a flat 4 star rating. But for me, I don't know, a triple threat tag match there's too much happening in that for me to get really fully invested in it. There was some really good spots, but my thing against the Young Bucks is there was 11 super kicks in that match alone. 11 of the same move in one match by one team. And everybody wants to, harp on WWE guys and like John Cena specifically for his 5 moves of doom. But you have about 15% of your offensive maneuvers being a super kick. And I just can't get into that. So that's the variety of movesets, the variety of the story that I've seen in the Kushida Scurll match is what had me invested in that. Because aside from, your standard Ric Flair chops that you're going to get by everybody, you didn't see the same move repeated over and over again like you do in that Young Bucks match, because it was just super kick after super kick. And you could tell when the end of the match is coming up because they do their super kick party. And once that happens, the end is near. So for that, I would have had it taken down a little bit. And that's why I thought Kushida versus Scurll was actually the match of the night.
Right. And I've had that same criticism of the Young Bucks before, too. It seems like their matches, they're crazy, they're insane, they're intense, but they do a lot of the super kicks. And to their credit, and to kind of back them up a little bit, the people love it. And they get paid to give the people what they want to see, and the more super kicks, the better for their fan base. The people that are buying Young Bucks merchandise, the people that or have made it possible for the Young Bucks to actually be homeowners for the first time and have made it possible for them to earn a living outside of WWE. They love that crap. And I'm not the biggest fan of all the super kicks, but I got to tell you, I really do enjoy their matches a lot more than I used to. So they're very entertaining, but I will have to, judge it for myself to see which match was better. But the readers of the Wrestling Observer and the folks on the message board and have all said that that match was the best, but it's really, it depends on what your taste is. Now, let's go ahead and let's talk about Bellator. I got suckered into buying Bellator.
And that doesn't surprise me at all. Like we've talked about it before. You get bought in so much to the hype. I haven't watched it yet. I read some reviews on it and the highlights. I guess Fedor and Mitrione knocked each other out at the same time before Mitrione recovered first and was able to take advantage of it. It just seemed like the most Bellator card that Bellator could put on.
Well, I gotta tell you, it was about the dumbest show I've ever seen in my life, but I was thoroughly entertained. The double knockdown of Fedor and Mitrione had me jumping out of my seat. I'm still a huge mark for Wanderlei Silva and Chael Sonnen, even though they're both 40 years old, way past their prime. But, I got to tell you, Chael Sonnen looked really good, man. He came in there. He looked a lot better. Physically looked a lot better. Maybe he's clean, maybe he's not. Who cares? But he looked a lot better going into this fight. He did basically everything he wanted with Wanderlei Silva. Now, Wanderlei did get a knockdown on him, so that really was kind of scary. But other than just the one knockdown, Chael had his way with Wanderlei Silva, and then afterwards just cut a hellacious promo, challenging Fedor, even though Fedor had just got knocked out. But the best part was he said, other than some guy, I can't remember what the guy's name is, but other than so-and-so being a world champion, I hate New York. And I was like, dude, Chael Sonnen absolutely gets it. He's the biggest heel in the business. I love Chael Sonnen. And it's things like that that make me want to come and see him fight, even though his fight wasn't the most exciting. If it was two other guys that we had never heard of, that would have probably been one of the more boring fights I've ever seen. But because of who was in it and I was emotionally invested, I really thoroughly enjoyed the fight.
Yeah, and to build on that, my first experience with Chael Sonnen, and I would say this is probably the case for a lot of people, was the Anderson Silva fight back in, was that 2011, 2012. So his charisma, his natural ability to draw heat is the best in the world. When he's done with MMA, the guy needs to be in a wrestling company somewhere, either being a manager or working as a creative worker, because he can get a promo over like nobody else's business. But I knew what that fight was going to be. It's a very, very past his prime Wanderlei Silva versus one of the best wrestlers that MMA has seen in Chael Sonnen. So you know what you're going to get there. Who was the actually, one thing I wanted to get to, Chael Sonnen called out Chuck Liddell today already. I don't know if you've seen that on Twitter, basically begging him to sign a contract with Bellator. And feels like at some point that fight's going to happen.
Oh, absolutely, because Chuck Liddell had come out and challenged Tito. Tito's not accepting. Tito, he's the most injured man in the history of the world. I think he was wheeled into Madison Square Garden this weekend on his deathbed, but somehow made it to where he can at ringside heckle Chael while he was fighting. But so I did see that Chael's calling out Chuck now. That's because Scott Coker has told Chael that he's not going to be able to fight Fedor, and he is not going to be able to fight Rory McDonald. So now he's calling out another big name. That's what Chael does. He tries to get money fights, and I would love to see that fight too. I don't know why. Maybe I'm interested in train wrecks, and I should feel guilty about wanting to see that fight, and I guess I do. But damn it, I want to see it. So, I hope Chuck Liddell takes the bait and actually signs the contract to fight this guy, because I'm all in for that fight. Yeah,
and I'm sure most people will be. One fight I do want to get to, it sounded like there was something that kind of bizarre happened in the Michael Chandler fight. Some kind of ankle injury. He claimed it was fine, jumped up and down on it, but the doctor stopped it. What happened there?
Well, so basically, his ankle wasn't fine. He was taking a step forward and then kind of moved back, and as he moved back, he rolled his ankle and it folded underneath him. And then so every time he would try to take a step forward, his ankle would just bend in half. And we could all see this. Now, while his ankle was bent in half at one point, he was still able to knock his opponent down, but then his opponent got right back up, and it was very clear to everybody watching, to the referee, to the people in the crowd, that they needed to stop the fight. And it was kind of weird because the referee kind of stopped it as if he had a cut on his eye, which is legal, but as soon as you stop it for anything other than a cut or an eye poke or a groin shot, the fight is over. So there was some confusion there. Eventually they went ahead and stopped the fight, and Chandler lost by TKO, which is complete bullshit. So they will most likely be doing a rematch. It just depends on how hurt Chandler is. I haven't heard any news about how severe his ankle injury, but it did look pretty bad.
Yeah, there was actually some news that had came out. Chandler deals with drop foot. Not sure how many people will be familiar with that. It's actually some kind of nerve damage to where you have trouble lifting the front of your foot. He said it's something he's dealt with his whole career, and he's fought through it. It's not a pain thing. It's not a pain issue. And this sounds really bad, but at some times his ankle will just go numb or be partially paralyzed to where he can't lift it. But he did... there was that video of him jumping up and down, signaling that his foot and ankle were fine. He said he was in no pain, but it's just a drop foot issue. No telling when it would actually be completely taken care of. But I do see that they're planning on having that rematch. And considering the way this fight ended, I feel like there's going to be a lot of intrigue when that rematch does happen. Another thing I wanted to get to, the Aaron Pico, the kid who fought Zach Freeman, he was Pico, a really highly decorated wrestler. I believe almost made the Olympic team at 19 years old in a very deep division, and a lot of hype surrounding that kid. And it sounds like he got tapped out pretty quickly, about 24 seconds into the first round. Did you get to see anything from him before he really got taken down and submitted?
No, I mean, the fight was too quick to see if this kid had anything. He looked, I don't want to say scared. Maybe scared is the wrong word, but he kind of looked intimidated as he was walking to the cage, and then he got in there. He rushed in, left his chin up. Zach Freeman uppercutted him, and then got him in a guillotine, and boom, it was over. It happened so fast. I actually got up to go get a bottle of water to come back to sit down because I was really excited to see Aaron Pico. He was the youngest kid ever to make the Olympic team in the last 40 years or something like that. And people had been saying for years that his boxing is actually much better than his wrestling, which is a pretty insane thing to say about a guy who is an Olympic caliber wrestler. So a lot of hype coming around this kid. They're saying that he's probably the next BJ Penn, except BJ Penn ultimately ended up sucking, which we'll get into later. But I think he was just overmatched. He got in there with a guy who, with an 8-2 record, who is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, who was probably 20 pounds heavier than him going into that fight. So he just bit off a lot more than he could chew. But, like they said on the broadcast, they kept reminding us over and over again, oh, Aaron Pico's young, he made a mistake, he'll come back. And then they try to compare him to Bernard Hopkins, which is stupid, by saying that, oh, well, Bernard Hopkins lost his first fight, and then he went on to be one of the greatest of all time, and blah, blah, blah. So, we'll see. I think he's going to drop down to 145 pounds. That's what he wrestled at. And hopefully he does bounce back, because I think the sport needs some new stars, and I think he could be a star. He's got all the athletic gifts. He can talk. He's got a good look. So, I really do hope that he bounces back. Now, another fight on the Bellator card, which was completely horseshit terrible, was Ryan Bader versus Phil Davis. Did you get it? I know you didn't watch it, but it was live on Spike for free. Did you hear anything about this fight?
I heard a little bit about it, but I have completely lost interest in both Ryan Bader and Phil Davis from their time in UFC, so I completely avoided what sounds like was a just complete snooze fest. They're both wrestlers, and one thing I've learned in MMA is when you put two great wrestlers against each other, you're going to get an awful fight, and from the sounds of it, that's kind of what happened here. Yeah,
and their first fight was awful, and Phil Davis has looked really good since he's been in Bellator. He's got nothing but knockouts since he's been here. And I thought maybe he's altered his style a little bit. And I was hoping that maybe Ryan Bader altered his style a little bit. and then you get two big-time veterans, two top 5 guys in the world. They're not just like the top 2 in Bellator. Like, these guys were highly ranked in the UFC before they came to Bellator. And I was kind of intrigued by the fight, and it turned out to be another dud. And the next fight that they're going to be making for Ryan Bader will be King Mo Lawal. And Mo Lawal is a really good boxer, but he is also a fantastic wrestler. So I'm thinking that this may actually also be a dud of a fight, kind of like King Mo versus Rampage. If you saw either one of those fights, both of those fights sucked.
Yeah, I seen the first fight in that. I wouldn't even want to really call it a potential trilogy because I guess they fought twice now. They've split the fights, I believe, and it's just kind of the same thing. You got guys who are not great athletes who are primarily wrestlers who have great wrestling, and when that occurs, it just never turns out well. I haven't been a fan of Bader since he lost to John Jones several years back. One thing I'd like to bring up here, we had, I believe, the younger Machida brother on this card. It looks like he had fought, and then Ryan Couture, Randy Couture's son, was also on that card. It looks like he had a unanimous decision victory. Or either of those guys, did they show anything that impressed you, or does it look like either of those guys are going to potentially be some decent prospects for Bellator long term? Because Bellator really needs their own young prospects, because all of their major draws right now are about 40 years old and way past their prime.
Well, Chinzo Machida is the older brother of Lyoto Machida, and so no, he did not look good. And Ryan Couture, he was an old Strikeforce guy who got swallowed into the UFC. He never really showed anything. I think those guys will be around Bellator a long time just because they're related to famous people. I really think that's all they got going for them, though, honestly. And there was one more fight on the card that we can get to, and then I want to kind of move on. Was Douglas Lima versus Lorenz Larkin. It was a complete snooze fest. It opened up the pay-per-view, and Douglas Lima won. And it looks like Douglas Lima will be taking on Rory McDonald here in the near future. Now, Joe, I got 2 words for you, and then I'm just going to let you go on a rant. LeVar Ball.
Jesus Christ, man. I blatantly said I was trying to avoid talking about this guy. I refuse to watch Raw because of him, but being on Twitter enough, you have to see what happened. I'm a huge Los Angeles Lakers fan, so I'm a great fan of Lonzo Ball, his son. The only reason anybody cares about LeVar Ball, for some reason, with Raw being in LA and Lonzo being the number 2 overall pick of the NBA draft to the Los Angeles Lakers, they put 2 and 2 together and was like, hey, let's bring the whole family onto Monday Night Raw, a whole family of people who are not wrestling fans and have no idea what wrestling is, just happened to be a big event in LA. They got LeVar on there, who for some reason took off his shirt and was going to fight The Miz and was doing some Mr. Miyagi kung fu fighting dances. And then you have his youngest son, when Dean Ambrose comes out, drop the N-bomb twice on a live microphone in the PG era WWE. And then Lonzo, who is the only reason anybody was there, never even really says a word. And WWE has to issue a statement because a 15-year-old kid dropped the N-word on live television in PG era WWE. I want to try to avoid LeVar Ball as much as possible because that guy is about the biggest piece of garbage in entertainment. For some reason, he's become famous because he just says outlandish crap all the time. But what a garbage segment that was. Like, I'm sorry for any fan who had to watch that live.
Well, tell us how you really feel, Joe. Crap. Yeah, so I actually watched that too because I saw everything going on Twitter, and it was like probably 70-30. 70% of the people absolutely hated it, and then 30% of the people it was so bad, but I couldn't stop watching it, and I'm not glad I did, but it was entertaining. And I gotta say, it was somewhat entertaining. I never want to see it again. I never want to see Dean Ambrose in a Big Baller Brand t-shirt ever again in my life. In fact, I never want to see a Big Baller Brand t-shirt ever again in my life. I too am a Lakers fan. I am excited for Lonzo Ball. I just hope that his dad is barred from every arena in NBA so that we never have to see that piece of crap ever again. Now, moving on from LeVar Ball. All right, so it was a pretty interesting week on Raw, other than the stupid LeVar Ball crap. Brock Lesnar got choked out by Samoa Joe. Brock Lesnar, there was a funny tweet going around comparing him to a California raisin. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but I am really liking what they're doing with Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe is going to make it very, very hard for them to just put over Lesnar strong and then move on to Roman Reigns. I think Samoa Joe has a big stake in this main event scene.
Yeah, I really agree with that. My worry is, and we've talked about it before, I've gotten hyped up for Lesnar matches before. I got really hyped up for Lesnar versus Randy Orton. I told everybody this could be one of the best matches in WWE because Orton is such a natural athlete. He's one of the great wrestlers of WWE, and Lesnar can be a great wrestler when he wants to be. And then I got completely let down by it. And then the same thing for Lesnar versus Goldberg. They booked a quick finish. It was shocking, but it wasn't a good wrestling match. So I've been trying to not get hyped up for Joe versus Lesnar, but they've really made Joe look strong in this. He choked out Paul Heyman to send a message. When Lesnar came back to confront him, he choked out Lesnar. And if you look, like Lesnar's face was beet red. Either he was holding his breath or Samoa Joe was really choking him. And I believe at one point you could see in the live broadcast where Lesnar says, "Hey, choke me," and apply a little bit more pressure, because Lesnar's face was beet red and not the normal beet red that he gets from just jumping up on the ring because he has terrible cardio. I'm hugely excited for this match, and I've tried to not let myself be excited. If they bomb this one, if they just have Lesnar go out there and end this in 2 or 3 moves, I may never watch a Raw-only pay-per-view headlined by Brock Lesnar again. Not just the Brock Lesnar match, but any Raw pay-per-view headlined by Brock Lesnar, I may never watch again if they do the same thing here, because I've gotten excited before and I've always been let down. I can't keep doing that to myself as a wrestling fan. So they have a chance to keep me hooked here. This match can be great. It could be physical as hell. I expect to see blood because these guys are going to tear into each other. I just hope they don't let me down again.
Yeah, and that brings me up to what they do from here, because obviously both of us agree, and I think everybody would agree, that Brock Lesnar just smashing and squashing Samoa Joe is not the best way to handle the situation, because Samoa Joe is going to be a headliner. He's going to be top 2 or 3 heel the rest of the year, and Roman Reigns is going to need opponents. So squashing him, I think, is completely out of the equation. But it looks like, if you read the Observer today, that they're going to go for SummerSlam, Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. So obviously Roman's going to have to beat Strowman, and Lesnar's going to have to beat Samoa Joe. But Samoa Joe and Braun Strowman both need to look strong. Now I got an idea. I don't have an idea for the ambulance match. I think they can kind of do a gimmick to where they put Braun Strowman in the ambulance. I don't really care about that match, honestly, although I am a big Strowman fan. But for the Lesnar and Samoa Joe match, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking at some point during the match, towards the end of the match, Lesnar's on top of Joe, and he hits him with one of those elbows that cuts him open, the same way that he did with Randy Orton last year. And he cuts him open, and then when he does that, Samoa Joe snatches his arm and gets him into an arm bar, and right before Lesnar's about to tap, the referee calls for the bell because Samoa Joe has lost too much blood and he can't continue. Because we're in the PG era, they don't want a guy bleeding, so then they call off the match because Samoa Joe's bleeding. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great finish to go with, because then you give the idea that Joe never lost, and you could either use that to set up a potential rematch with Lesnar if he just wants to beat Lesnar, or you could have Joe booked against Roman Reigns for the title. And from the sounds of it, I really think they're going to put Roman as the heel. Joe is getting too much love from the fans. He's the anti-hero, kind of like a CM Punk, where he doesn't play into the crowd, but he's more of a quiet bad guy who the crowd still cheers. Roman is just completely booed now, so I think if that match were to occur, Joe is probably the face, whether WWE likes it or not. I would love that finish because it's signals the physicality of it. You don't have anybody look weak. and you plant seeds for future matches, whether it be against Roman or a rematch with Lesnar at possibly Survivor Series, Rumble, or WrestleMania down the line, wherever you decide to do that. So I would probably roll with that. However they choose to do it that way, I think would be a fantastic finish.
Yeah, I really dig that finish. Now on SmackDown, they went ahead and they had a second women's Money in the Bank. They kind of redid that thing because of what happened at the Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Now again, the match was pretty similar to the original women's Money in the Bank match at the pay-per-view. Carmella won again. James Ellsworth interfered again. And I think it was a better match, but again, dude, so women in these hardcore matches, and I don't want to come off as sexist, but it gets to be a little sloppy. Now I've never been in the ring before, I don't know how hard it is, but I do know what I'm seeing. And what I'm seeing is that whenever they're not used to this stuff, and whenever they're having these hardcore matches, it just comes across as sloppy. But I think in the end, it was a good thing for the women's division, especially considering that on Monday Night Raw, you had a women's gauntlet main event that Sasha Banks won, and then on SmackDown, you had a women's Money in the Bank for the main event, and then on NXT, you had a last woman standing match. Am I correct with that? Asuka against, what was her name? Nikki Cross?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, all three of the major shows for WWE main evented by women this week, and I get what you're saying on the hardcore matches. It's something people have touched on because women like Carmella probably haven't wrestled in any ladder matches or any sort of hardcore matches throughout her career. Tamina, who was also in the match, primarily has been in WWE throughout her career, so you haven't seen her in any of those matches as well. Charlotte and Sasha Banks, going back about a year ago, they got to have a hardcore I Quit match, I think, on Monday Night Raw, and they also did Hell in the Cell, where I had no complaints in those matches. They beat the shit out of each other, and it was awesome. And the last woman standing match, they had the no disqualifications hardcore element there. Got to see Asuka pull out a trash can, put it over Nikki Cross, and then repeatedly kick her with it. I think it's just certain women wrestlers have been in those matches, and the others who haven't, it clearly shows they haven't been. So it's going to take some time now that WWE is letting them do it. It means they'll let them do it on house shows more, and those house shows is really where they get to perfect their craft in those matches. They have all the ability in the world. I've seen some great matches out of Becky Lynch, Charlotte, and Carmella. So getting them in that hardcore element more, I think, will give them a little bit more potential in those matches coming up. I think Carmella winning the women's Money in the Bank is still the right move because it immediately makes her relevant. And then if she fails, then you can just pull the Money in the Bank off of her. She can lose it. No harm, no foul done. So I think it's the right move for the entire division moving forward. And if you haven't watched the Asuka-Nikki Cross match yet, that match was killer. Those women tore each other apart. They put each other through tables, beat each other with chairs, did suplexes onto piles of chairs. And it really felt like Asuka could have finally lost. There were several times where it took her to the count of 9 to get up. Nikki Cross pushed her to the limit. I love the Nikki Cross character, but her ability as a wrestler has improved drastically over the last few months. And it feels like they're setting up that Asuka is not completely invincible. And I think come TakeOver in Los Angeles, I think we see Asuka drop the title. That will likely be to Ember Moon that weekend because Asuka's got.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that Asuka will be losing her title at NXT TakeOver in Brooklyn. And, I'm not the biggest fan of Ember Moon, but they have been building her up for quite a bit of time. So she's obviously the person to go ahead and do that. And it looks like, they signed a bunch of new women wrestlers for their women's tournament, so maybe one of them will come in and actually take the place of Asuka because NXT is really going to be missing her from that roster. I think she's one of the top draws for that show, and hopefully she goes to SmackDown. We always say that we want all the good wrestlers to go to SmackDown, even though SmackDown the wrestling isn't exactly better than Raw. We just kind of all like to talk about that and like to believe it because AJ Nakamura on there, but. I do think that SmackDown would be the best place for her.
I would totally agree with that. I think Raw having Sasha Banks and Alexa Bliss, and even though they've completely buried her, Bayley is over there. SmackDown is missing what could potentially be a big heel. And Raw also has Nia Jax, who sounds like she's going to get Alexa Bliss and will be the top heel on Raw. So Asuka, she would work fine on Raw, but I think SmackDown needs her more. And a potential Asuka versus Charlotte Flair match, looking at those two because they have a longevity in wrestling and they both can put on hell of a match. I think that feud would be the money match for the women's division on SmackDown, and they may hold that off until WrestleMania potentially, but I think that's the match that needs to happen, and it can only happen if Asuka's on SmackDown. So that's the route I would run with. Another thing I want to touch on real quick with NXT, don't want to cover it too much, but they had Hideo Itami a little bit more, and kind of building up him and Chris Hero. There's a couple options there. Hideo Itami got his nose broken in his match with Oni Larkin, and went back, got his nose set, and then came back out and finished the match, and then called out Chris Hero. And when Chris Hero came out, Sanity attacked the both of them. One thing I've been pushing is that everyone is expecting Itami to just turn heel on Hero. I like the idea of a Chris Hero, Hideo Itami heel tag team. I think it works perfectly with how WWE likes their tag teams, of one big guy to come in off the hot tag and then one small guy to carry the match. Chris Hero and Itami have both had promos where they've talked about being frustrated in NXT and not living up to their potential. So I think at some point we're going to see those guys be the next heel tag team and potentially face Authors of Pain somewhere down the line. They're already going to face Sanity next week together, and it'll either be Itami turning heel on Hero if they lose, or Hero and Itami sticking together as a tag team. It's kind of a story that WWE's told before, looking back with Daniel Bryan and Kane, and I'm sure you could find 1,000 other examples of similar situations. I think it's a perfect scenario for those two guys, because I don't know if they exactly have a main roster fit, but as a tag team where the main roster is lacking a lot of depth, I think it works out to get them there faster.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I think that they would work really well together. And his name's Cassius Ohno now, but I'm a big fan of his. I think he needs to work on his ring gear a little bit. He does not look like a professional. But other than that, yeah, I think that Cassius Ohno / Chris Hero, he's one of the better wrestlers in the world right now. And then Hideo Itami is needing something, because when he came in, man, he had a ton of fanfare. I didn't really know who he was, so whenever he got signed, I did some research and I looked at some of his matches in Japan. And that guy can just flat out go, but he's been snake bit ever since he came into NXT. So I'm really hoping that they have something for them. And a good heel tag team run in NXT would be great. Or even if they were a babyface tag team and they could go against the Authors of Pain after the Authors of Pain Sanity program is done. I think that would be a really, really good option. Now, I think the biggest news to come out of SmackDown is our favorite, our guy, Mr. Mauro Ranallo, had re-signed his WWE contract. He's no longer on SmackDown. He's come back after that whole fiasco with JBL and the Wrestling Observer and the Table for Three episode. So he's back. He seems like he's in good spirits. He's in good health. He called Bellator this past Saturday, and now he is the lead play-by-play on NXT. How did the show sound with Mauro Ranallo doing the soundtrack?
You could definitely tell the difference, and not to take anything, like I said, not to take anything away from Tom Phillips, because he's good at what he does. But Mauro Ranallo and Nigel McGuinness are the best announced team that WWE has now. And it definitely made a difference. You could tell he was re-energized. You could feel his passion for wrestling and the way he calls matches, very similar to Jim Ross. And that's who everybody likes to compare him to. He talked about when Itami got his nose broken, and just the descriptive terms that he uses, the way he calls actual wrestling moves and makes them sound real, even if he's just making them up, because one wrestling move could have 100 different names, but he'll come up with something for it, and he makes it feel like a legitimate fight, like you would get with UFC or Bellator. He brings a legitimacy to that show. You could already tell the difference. He is going to be the full-time guy there for 2 years at least, and the weekly shows will be great, but all of those matches are short. Where he's going to really thrive and make a difference is the NXT takeovers. Those matches being a little bit longer, not a lot of promos to kill time. He will make those matches feel so much more special by just being on the announce team. And him and Nigel McGuinness work well together. And hopefully at some point, when Vinnie Mac steps down and Kevin Dunn steps down and Triple H, Paul Levesque takes over the main roster, we'll get to see Mauro Ranallo and Nigel McGuinness on either SmackDown or Raw and possibly call a WrestleMania together, because those two guys have the best chemistry of any wrestling team since Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler in their prime together. It felt great. It made the program so much more fun, and I look forward to hearing them together for a long time.
Absolutely, me too. And I am just super stoked about the next takeover in Brooklyn, and we will be covering that the week before it happens. So, you ready to get to some segments? Let's go ahead and get to our first segment, and it's my personal favorite, and we will most likely be doing this segment on a weekly basis. It's called Vince Russo is a Douche. Now, if you don't know why we're calling Vince Russo a douche this week, it's because of what he did last week. So, for years, he had been calling out Jim Cornette to meet him face-to-face. And then here recently, he was calling out Eric Bischoff as well to meet him face-to-face because they had badmouthed him on WWE television on an episode for Table for Three. And when Jim Cornette said that he would oblige him and he would do it for $5,000, no guns, no knives, nobody gets to be there, nobody gets to see it, just him and Vince in a park somewhere, then he said he would absolutely do it. So after he said that, Vince Russo decided to take it upon himself and file an emergency protection order against Jim Cornette, who is a 55-year-old overweight guy who's probably never been in a fight in his life. But Vince Russo is such in mortal fear of Jim Cornette, claiming that he'd been getting stalked and harassed for the last 18 years in multiple states, and he was afraid that Jim Cornette was going to come to his house and kill his wife and this and that. I gotta tell you, it was probably the most entertaining wrestling segments I've ever heard in my life. Jim Cornette and Vince Russo going back and forth, and Jim Cornette's rebuttal to the emergency protection order. Did you get a chance to listen to that?
You know, I hadn't heard Cornette's rebuttal to it yet. I had seen him, tweet a couple things on Twitter. It just absolutely blows my mind that an offer to meet on Twitter now is grounds for a emergency protective order. The guys don't even live in the same state. They probably live hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from each other. And somehow he was able to get a protective order. I don't understand it. Vince Russo is as much of an instigator as Cornette is. I just don't see how any judge could look at the information that would be available and think that Jim Cornette could do harm to Vince Russo given the situations.
Well, I got to correct you on one thing. So Vince Russo recently has moved to Evansville, Indiana, which is about 2 hours away from Louisville, apparently. So that was part of the reason why Vince Russo was so scared. And members of the Cult of Cornette had found out where Vince Russo lived, and they told that to Jim Cornette. And Jim Cornette made it be known that he does know where Vince Russo lives. However, he had not directly stated that he was going to go to his house or do anything like that. But the fact that Cornette had this information had Vince Russo scared for his life, and I absolutely love it. You know why? Because Vince Russo is a douche. All right, so let's go ahead and get to our next segment. You said you wanted to do a trivia segment.
Yes, I've got a great piece of trivia here for you. Think back for all the times that the Wrestling Observer has been doing star ratings, all the thousands of wrestlers that have been rated, probably the hundreds of thousands, if not maybe close to 1 million matches that have been rated. Who would you think, on average, of any WWE superstar has the highest average match rating?
So we're not talking New Japan, WCW, ECW. We're not talking just WWE, right?
No, we're going to go for their entire career. So if they've wrestled in any other company, the highest match rating, but they've wrestled under the WWE brand. And I will say to not just make it to where it could be someone like Jushin Liger, who wrestled one match for NXT, we'll say has wrestled under the WWE brand for at least a year, and their entire career, their average match rating would be the highest of any wrestler who's ever competed in WWE for at least a year.
Well, I think I got it. I think it's Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson, right?
Not even close, my friend. I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. This guy actually has the fourth highest match rating of any competitor, period. Not just in WWE, but any competitor, period. That would be Kenta, better known to WWE fans as Hideo Itami. He has an average match rating of 4.17, and he would be the fourth highest rated wrestler in Wrestling Observer history, and by far the highest rated wrestler who's ever competed in WWE for longer than a year. And to put that into perspective, a guy like The Undertaker, who has had a ton of highly rated matches, is in the 220 range on that list. So Kenta, Hideo Itami, people forget how good he is. We touched on it a little bit. He's been snake bitten in his time in NXT, dealing with a lot of injuries. He has the highest match rating by far of any WWE superstar, and like I said, number 4 all time.
Wow, I didn't even see that coming. I should have known it was a Japanese guy. You know, Japanese wrestlers always get the highest match ratings, so they're a bunch of assholes. All right, so this weekend we got a big card. We got the G1 special in the USA. It's New Japan Pro Wrestling. They're going to be in Long Beach, California. They're going to do a show on Saturday, and it's going to be about a 5-hour show. Now, big matches that are going to be happening on Saturday is Cody Rhodes taking on Kazuchika Okada for the IWGP Championship. Cody Rhodes is going in as the Ring of Honor champion, so that should be an amazing match. I'm really looking forward to that, and I have a prediction. I think Cody Rhodes is going to win it. What do you think?
You know, a lot of people are starting to feel that way, and there's great story for it because you can use the storyline that Okada has been beaten down in his last 2 matches with Omega, and hour-long match and a 45-minute match. You can build the story that Okada's tired coming into this. I think he's held the title for close to a year, if not over a year now, and Cody Rhodes is the hot indie name. Looking from information from indie bookers, he's the top name out there for indie shows. If they're looking for a guy who's going to sell a lot of tickets, it appears to be Cody Rhodes. So having him be the Ring of Honor champion, New Japan trying to make their mark in America for the first time, getting a live special in America, you really want to do something shocking. And it's something that's going to get people talking for a show like that. I mean, going back when WWE put on their first show on the WWE Network, the WrestleMania 30, that was a big part of why The Undertaker lost on that WrestleMania card. It was the first WrestleMania on the WWE Network. They wanted people to feel like anything can happen at that time, and the biggest way to do that was to have Taker lose. Playing that with New Japan, if you really want people to feel like anything can happen, having Okada, who is probably the best wrestler in the world, I mean, most people would argue that. If he's not the best wrestler, he's at least top 2 or 3. Best wrestler in the world, lose to Cody Rhodes in a champion versus champion match would get people talking and really make it feel like anything can happen anytime a New Japan show is on television.
Absolutely, and they're trying to make a big splash in the U.S., and I think Cody Rhodes would do that. I think that could facilitate the breakup between Cody Rhodes and the Elite, break up the Bullet Club and have 2 warring factions there, and then set up a match down the road with Cody Rhodes and Kenny Omega. And you could also do things in Ring of Honor, defend the title, the IWGP title in Ring of Honor. So I think they could go with that. Obviously, Okada wouldn't be too hurt by it. He's going to get the title back. He'll still be headlining the Tokyo Dome this year. So I could see them really doing that. Or, they could just keep it on Okada. I think either way you go, there's positives and negatives either way. Oh, excuse me.
I'd really agree with that. And, another thing they could do, I don't think New Japan does this a whole lot, but I wouldn't mind seeing like a triple threat down the road, Omega versus Rhodes versus Okada. There's a lot of moving pieces there that you could do. They really set themselves up nicely for things they want to do in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if Okada keeps the title because I feel like at some point they'll probably set up Omega versus Okada 3, even though, it's now a draw and a loss for Omega. But those matches have been so great and so highly publicized that they're going to have to do a rematch eventually. Maybe they wait until Wrestle Kingdom next year, or they could potentially do that this year. I don't know.
Well, I gotta cut you off right there. So it was just announced in the Observer today that in the G1 tournament, both Omega and Okada are in the B block, and they have already been scheduled for a match here in the next couple of weeks. So they will actually be wrestling in the G1 with a 30-minute time limit, and I'm actually pretty excited about that one.
Yeah, that'll be a great match, but being a 30-minute time limit, I think, might restrict them. So I really, if that is what's happening, I hope people don't expect the same match quality that we've got from those two guys in the last two outings. But again, that's huge, and I didn't read that. I guess I glossed over that, but I'm sure it'll absolutely tear the house down. But a 30-minute time limit might restrict them a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. But hey, you know what? If anybody can do it's funny that a 30-minute match would restrict them when most guys can't even do 30 minutes. So it just shows you the quality of wrestlers that Kenny Omega and Kazuchika Okada are. So also this weekend on that G1 special is Omega versus Michael Elgin. They're going to have the IWGP United States title tournament. And I believe Naito is also in the tournament, correct?
Yeah, we got Naito versus Tomohiro Ishii in that tournament. Looks like Hangman Page versus Jay Lethal, and Juice Robinson versus Zack Sabre Jr., who, if anybody watched the Cruiserweight Classic last year, Zack Sabre Jr., a really big independent guy, a fantastic technical wrestler. I think at the end of the day that Omega probably walks away with that title, but would not at all be surprised to see Zack Sabre Jr. walk away with it. Another thing on this card, I didn't realize this guy was still wrestling. Billy Gunn in an 8-man tag match. I didn't even realize that guy was still alive after he got cut from WWE.
Well, I guess we could have done our segment of he's still alive with badass Billy Gunn. But not only is he in the 8-man tag on Saturday, that's going to lead into Sunday when he gets an IWGP Intercontinental title match against Tanahashi. That is going to be airing on Access the following Friday. But yeah, they're actually going to be in the co-main event spot. Obviously, the finals of the United States title tournament will be headlining that show, and they also have the Young Bucks on Sunday. But a big weekend ahead for New Japan Pro Wrestling. I'm really anxious to see how well they come off. So, Joe, I think that's going to have to go ahead and do it because I got a big surprise for everybody. I didn't really announce it at the top of the show. I guess if you read the show description, you'll already know this, but we have none other than Conrad Thompson as our guest on the debut episode of the Podcast Express. Now, if you're not familiar with Conrad Thompson, he gets over 5 million downloads per month between his two shows, What Happened When with Tony Schiavone and Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard over on the MLW Radio Network. So it's a really fun interview. We're going to do two parts. Part 1 will be released today, and then we'll release part 2 next week, and then we'll go ahead and release the full interview for everybody to enjoy. But it's a very fun and very interesting conversation. So if you're a fan of podcasting and if you're a fan of his podcast, go ahead and stay tuned for that. We're going to be playing that here shortly. Joe, do you got anything else for anybody?
I just wanted to say it's something we had talked about earlier in the week. 10 years since the Chris Benoit, I'll just call it the incident, to remain respectful on that. It's always messed with me that about 3 weeks before everything happened, you and I had watched Chris Benoit wrestle in Rolla, Missouri. 10 years since that, and it's one of the things that had completely changed wrestling forever and completely changed the way that wrestlers are handled in terms of the substance abuse policy and concussions. Looking at Daniel Bryan right now, not able to wrestle because of concussions. A lot of that goes back to the Chris Benoit incident. It's been 10 years since that, and kind of a taboo subject with WWE. Miss the wrestler, but can never forget what the guy did.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of rough. You sent me those old Observers from 2007, and I was reading through them as I had time. And I remember when I was a kid, Chris Benoit was one of my top 5 favorite wrestlers. I was a big fan of his whenever he was a member of the Horsemen, and I really pulled for him. He was always kind of the underdog. He was small, so he never really got pushed to the main event until he got to WWE, and then he ended up winning the heavyweight title at WrestleMania 20 against Shawn Michaels and Triple H. And that was, it was so exciting for me to be able to see him and Eddie Guerrero at the end of that WrestleMania, two of my favorites, two guys that I really cheered for, the underdogs, finally getting their due. And then, we lost Eddie in 2006, and then in 2007, 10 years ago, Chris Benoit did what he did, and I don't even really want to, everybody knows what happened. But I actually remember exactly where I was whenever I heard it. It was kind of like, not to compare it to 9/11, I'm just saying the moment was kind of like 9/11 for me, because I know exactly where I was at, what I was doing. I was in Yokota Air Base, Japan, and I had just gotten back from Missouri. I had spent a couple weeks out there, and we all had went to the show in Rolla, and we got to see him. He was wrestling Edge, correct?
Yeah, he was wrestling Edge. That was we held up our Edge sucks signs and got to argue a little bit with Edge during that show, and yeah, just surreal.
Yeah, man. We didn't mean to bring everybody down with the 10-year anniversary of the Chris Benoit. Well, let's call it the tragedy, the Benoit tragedy, because that's absolutely what it was. So before we get to Conrad, let's go ahead and cheer everybody up. So let's do another new segment. You want to do another new segment?
Yeah, I'm good for another new segment. What do you got?
This one's called Dana White is a fucking liar.
Oh, man, we could probably do at least a weekly segment on Dana White being a lying piece of shit.
Yeah, man. So this week's Dana White as a liar is he had booked Damian Maia versus Tyron Woodley for UFC 214 on July 29th in Anaheim. And he came out and stated that George St. Pierre is going to fight the winner, or he said that he had just had a meeting with George St. Pierre, and they were both in agreement that he will fight the winner of Damian Maia versus Tyron Woodley. Well, about an hour ago, George St. Pierre said that meeting never happened. I never agreed to that, and I'm still fighting Michael Bisping. So, Dana White, you're a liar.
What a piece of trash Dana White is. He used to be my favorite, commissioner or CEO in sports, and now you just can't believe a single word the guy says anymore.
Absolutely not. So, hey, Joe, that's going to go ahead and do it, man. Let's get to Conrad Thompson. Actually, before that, Joe, what's your Twitter account?
At Joe Gilbert 1992.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
So we got at Joe Gilbert 1992. Hit me up on Twitter, and don't forget about the Podcast Express at Pod Express. And
I'm at Get Up Mike, and that's going to do it for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, especially all the people who are only tuning in for Conrad Thompson. Hey, stick around. We're going to have him again next week, and then we're going to be working on more guests as time goes on. Thank you very much. All right, I'm here with Conrad Thompson. He's the host of Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Pritchard, and What Happened When with Tony Schiavone. He's also the owner and operator of First Family Mortgage out of Huntsville, Alabama. Conrad, how you doing, man?
I'm good, dude. I appreciate you taking a little time to talk some wrestling with me today. How are you?
Oh, no, it's the pleasure's all mine, man. I'm doing really good. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot later for you, man. I'm over on the West Coast, so I appreciate you staying up late with me.
Happy to do it, man. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of catch up. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, at first I thought I'd like to introduce you to our audience. A lot of my friends, when I told them that I was going to have you on the show, they were pretty excited, and some of them didn't quite know exactly how you got started in this podcasting business, man. So how does a mortgage guy going from being just a regular wrestling fan to probably the #1 podcasting co-host in the world?
Well, I'll remove the probably. That's first, I guess. No, seriously, I just became friends with Ric Flair in 2013, and we hit it off and became fast friends, and he had an opportunity to do a podcast, and he knew that I advertised my mortgage company on the radio and television, and he thought that I could kind of do him some justice to sit in with him for one of his very first podcasts with CBS, and instead of doing a regular guest, just ask him fan questions about his career And we did that, and it went well. And when it was all said and done, he wanted to do more of it. CBS dug it, he dug it, so we kept it going.
Yeah, I was a really big fan of that original CBS show, and then you guys ended up moving over to MLW. So whatever happened with that?
We moved to MLW and kind of owned our own show and started the Ric Flair show. And, it was just a time for us to try something new, and it worked out. We had a good time doing the Ric Flair show, and then, like all things, eventually, the new wore off, and real life got in the way. And Rick is busier than ever, so he kind of retired from podcasting.
Right.
And I picked up the slack with Tony Schiavone.
Well, there you go. And I really happen to enjoy your Tony Schiavone show. Now, Tony Schiavone, ever since he basically when Monday Nitro went off the air and WCW folded up, he kind of went into hiding a little bit. We kind of heard of him on TNA. He did a couple episodes of TNA Impact, and then I think a couple years ago he did an episode of the Ross Report with Jim Ross, and then all of a sudden, man, you guys had that big announcement on MLW, the MLW's Twitter, that you guys were doing your new podcast. How in the world did you get him to come out of hiding?
Well, if I'm honest with you, it was kind of easy. I had met him through doing a podcast with Ric Flair for CBS. I found him to be very hilarious on there and a wonderful storyteller. And, of course, he's a broadcaster in his real life, doing a lot of radio and baseball games. So when I realized that the Bruce show had gotten so successful, I thought, this is really only part of the story. We need to tell the WCW side of the story, and who could be there to kind of be my Bruce. And I wanted someone who hadn't been overexposed. Bruce was kind of one of the best-kept secrets in wrestling. So I needed someone who hadn't done 1,000 shoot interviews and been all over everything. Tony Schiavone kind of fit the bill, and he was there from 83 to 01, so you had plenty of time to cover with him, a similar number of years to what Bruce Pritchard had. So I reached out to Tony and asked for his email address, and told him that I had the pleasure of being in the crowd when he was on stage at the NWA Legends Fan Fest last year. And I realized he has fresh perspective. He hasn't been overexposed. He was there the entire time. He's a professional broadcaster. And, oh, by the way, he's the Bob Saget of pro wrestling. I just made my pitch in a pretty well-written email, if I say so myself, and he replied with 2 words, I'm in.
That's so awesome. And you're absolutely right about him being the Bob Saget of pro wrestling. Some of the stories you guys are telling on that show, I have to turn really down low whenever I'm at work, and they'll catch me giggling over there on Monday mornings at my cubicle.
Well, I appreciate that, man. It was kind of a happy accident. Never intended on the show, having that sort of sense of humor or personality. But it is the real Tony Schiavone. It was organic, and it just fit.
Right. I feel like we're actually getting to know him, because for the longest time, he was more of a professional, clean-cut, white meat babyface talking head on Monday Nitro. And now you're getting to see the real Tony, and I think you guys are hitting a home run with that show, as well as the Bruce Pritchard show. Now, Bruce wasn't exactly in hiding. He'd been doing some episodes, but that is my must-listen to each and every Friday. You guys knock it out of the park each week. It's a mandatory listening for me. So I got a couple of questions about the Bruce Pritchard show, and then we'll kind of transition on to some, more regular wrestling talk. So which episode got you the most heat from the WWE offices?
Well, I don't know that we necessarily got any heat specifically. We've had several episodes that warranted a phone call, and even more when I would see guys in person, they would want to kind of talk my ear off about it. But the only one that we were a little nervous about was the Sunny episode, because it kind of caught us by surprise how big our audience had become and what type of power the podcast had, where some of the content we covered on that show was the talk of television tape that week for the WWE. And we didn't hear that just once. We heard it multiple times. And that's when we realized, hey, man, people are paying attention. We've got a little bit of influence here, and we're not saying from a braggadocious way. We just need to be careful and at least mindful with the way we use it. So we have tried to go into those conversations and those sort of sensitive topics with the end in mind about who all might be affected with this 20 years later.
Right. I was going to ask you about that episode specifically, and if you had to do it all over again, do you think that maybe you would have kind of not gone so in depth with some of the more let's say interesting and darker stories, specifically surrounding Shawn Michaels? Do you think that you would have probably tried to stay away from that a little bit more?
Without question, the biggest regret I have doing the podcast is telling the lipstick story. And that wasn't a story that either one of us had ever heard before. We were literally reading it right from our book. And at the time, I felt like that kind of absolved me of any sort of responsibility. But that's short-sighted, and it's not fair, because you're talking about a guy who had been married at that point for 20 years, who had two, high school-age children. He's in a different spot, and I didn't really consider that. I considered, how crazy it was that he would share this information. But what I didn't really put together until that show aired was that, and I'm not saying this to be ugly, how many people bought that book at that point? 2,000, 3,000 people. Meanwhile, 600,000 people heard the podcast.
Right.
So it's a totally different deal. So you could say, well, she's awful for writing it. Well, she told 2,000 people, and we told 600. It's a different deal.
Yeah, I never read that book. I had no interest in it. And so when you guys told those stories, that was the first time I was hearing it. And I was kind of uncomfortable as well. But, it turned out to be probably one of your better episodes. Now, one of the latest episodes you guys have done on Vince Russo has been the talk of Twitter, to say the least. Now, Vince has come out here recently and said that he was able to give you guys a call and smooth things over. So how is that relationship right now?
Oh, everything's fine. We're good. Vince Russo and I have never been crossed ever. I know that he and Bruce had a little bit of a situation a few years ago, but as far as I know, all of that has been squared away. And as we talk to you now, in late June, everything's fine. Right,
and I'm not trying to get you into trouble here, and but I got to ask you, since it's in the news now. Vince Russo had filed an emergency protection order against Jim Cornette, which it kind of sounds pretty silly and ridiculous, and it was been the talk of social media over the last week. Jim Cornette has cut a show on it. Vince Russo just did another podcast about why he did it. What are your thoughts on the whole situation?
Well, my initial thought was, it's wrestling, so it's a work. Everything in wrestling is a work, and they wanted to take this, kind of quote-unquote blood feud to another level and some more attention, so mission accomplished. Well, now that we've had a little bit of time to let some of that digest, maybe it's not the work that I thought it was. However, I can't say that I would call it stupid of Russo, given some of the comments that have been said over the years, in public and in private. It's not a bad idea, if you're really concerned about your wife, to go ahead and just get one extra layer of protection. I like to think in terms of worst case scenario. Well, what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen would be Cornette shows up and you're not home, and he, doesn't behave himself as well as maybe you'd like. Is that unlikely? Absolutely. Is it maybe even a little ridiculous to even consider? Absolutely. But is it something that you can give yourself peace of mind for a little bit of paperwork? Absolutely. So from that standpoint, I kind of understand it. But the realistic side of me says, dude, this is all a waste of time. Nothing was ever going to happen.
Right, yeah. The whole thing is kind of, it seems really silly, but, the fact that he did it was pretty entertaining, to say the least. Jim Cornette's rebuttal to what the emergency protection order was pretty awesome. So, at the very least, we got some entertainment value out of the whole thing. So let's go ahead and transition away from from your podcasting, and let's go ahead and talk some wrestling. What are your thoughts about the upcoming Great Balls of Fire pay-per-view and the main event of Samoa Joe and Brock Lesnar? Where do you see them going with that? Because I'm kind of scared that they're going to do what they did with Randy Orton at SummerSlam last year and kind of squash, Samoa Joe in less than 5 minutes and bloody him up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Lesnar retains, but I'm not scared for it. I don't think this is going to be the dream match that a lot of people want it to be. I think sometimes dream matches need to stay dream matches for a reason. I think that Lesnar really works a better style with a smaller opponent, and I think you could say the same thing about Samoa Joe. Some of Samoa Joe's most well-reviewed matches are against guys who were, Austin Aries or Loki or Christopher Daniels size. Very rarely do you see him paired up with a super heavyweight and it becoming a match that everybody is raving about. That doesn't mean that he couldn't do that. Of course he could, but it doesn't seem that has happened with any sort of regularity. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at on it. I think it'll be a fun match, but I don't think it's going to be this all-time Matt Classic 10-star main event people want it to be.
Right, so you're not thinking it's going to get 6.5 stars, right?
Well, I don't think they're wrestling in the Tokyo. So,
no.
And we have a lot of fun with that on Bruce's show, but I'm a big fan of Dave Meltzer and everything that he does, and I'm certainly a big fan of these action figures and little standees and things like that they're producing. Yes, some of it's silly, but if people are having fun with it, what's the harm in that?
Right. I mean, it gives us stuff to talk about, so I love the fact that he rates the matches the way he does, and I love the fact that people get pissed off about it. We're wrestling fans. That's what we're supposed to do.
I totally agree.
Right. So since we went ahead and brought up the Tokyo Dome, now matches in Japan, we'll go ahead and kind of tease Dave Meltzer here a little bit. Matches in Japan usually start off at about 3 stars for even their opening match because they're in Japan. But this coming up Saturday, New Japan is in Long Beach, California. Now, how many stars do they get taken away for the fact that they're in the United States?
I'm sorry, you broke up on me. Can you say that again?
Well, so I said, so New Japan, their shows in Japan at the Tokyo Dome or at the Budokan, their matches, their worst matches, usually start off at around 3 stars. Now, how many stars get taken away for their show coming up this Saturday, which happens to be in Long Beach, California?
Well, if Dave is there, it'll be rated a lot better.
Right.
Dave once gave a house show match between Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair 10.5 stars. So if Meltzer's there, it's automatically a star or 2 better.
Right. So what are your thoughts on the New Japan product? I hear you talk a lot about WWE and what they got going on. You were on MLW radio at one point, and you didn't seem to be like you're the biggest fan of New Japan, but what are your thoughts on New Japan, and will you be watching this weekend?
I'm not a huge New Japan fan. I do check it out, but most of the time when I'm checking it out, it's stuff that's got a little bit of age on it, and it's airing on the Access Network. I think that Jim Ross and Josh Barnett do a job with it, and overall, I'm pretty pleased with their performance as well. So I can't say anything bad about New Japan.
Right, and so their show's coming up this Saturday, and Cody Rhodes, who Cody Rhodes, right? He's a friend of yours?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you think about Cody Rhodes' progression since he's left the WWE? He's totally put that Stardust character behind him. He's really made a real big name for himself on the indie scene and Ring of Honor, New Japan. What are your thoughts on what he's been able to do this last year?
Well, I guess I should clarify, I am friendly with Cody Rhodes, but we're not like BFFs or anything. I have great respect for his family. I've done some business with his brother. Obviously we had him on the Ric Flair show, and I think he listens to the Bruce Pritchard podcast. So, I'm very friendly with him, but we're not BFFs, but I am certainly very proud of his accomplishment to become a world champion. It's a big deal, and I think a lot of people sleep on that belt a little bit more than they should. In terms of prestige, to me, it's still the WWE title. We've most recently seen the modern-day Maharaja possess. I think that's still the number 1 title in the business. I think you could argue that the New Japan World title is number 2. And then for my worldview, Ring of Honor is number 3. And Impact and everybody else, round out the top 5. But to me, the Ring of Honor belt still means something. And for Cody to have an opportunity to carry that belt, which is the same belt that, really, really phenomenal wrestlers held, whether it was CM Punk or Daniel Bryan or Seth Rollins or Kevin Owens. The best of the best have held this, and for him to have that opportunity now, I consider to be a great honor.
Yeah, Cody Rhodes is absolutely great. He actually had come up here a couple of months ago and did a show here in Northern California for APW. He's actually coming back next Friday night. I will be there for APW in Pacifica, California, and he hopefully will be defending both titles. We'll see how likely that is after this weekend. He's going to be going for the IWGP Championship against Okada, title for title. So I'm pretty excited about that. Well, Conrad, I really appreciate you doing the show, man. I think that we're going to go from 60 followers to a hell of a lot more followers than what we have right now, and it's all because of you, brother. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, man, sorry I was a little late getting together. We just finished taping the CM Punk episode. I hope everybody digs that. It's going to drop this Friday at noon, and then next Friday we're bringing In Your House Canadian Stampede. And then right in the middle, this coming Monday, we're going to cover the 1996 Bash at the Beach, where Hulk Hogan turned heel, a really iconic moment in the history of the sport. The story of CM Punk is a little bit of what might have been and what nearly wasn't. And then, of course, Canadian Stampede, maybe the hottest crowd in WWE history. It's going to be a fun couple of shows. Check them all out at MLWradio.com. I'm on Twitter at Hey It's Conrad, and I'd love to help you save some money on your mortgage. And you'll be glad that you went to SaveWithBruce.com. Bruce Pritchard and I are helping families all across the nation buy houses with no money down, refinance to get rid of all their debt, and most importantly, get out of debt faster. So whether you've got a second mortgage, you've got credit card debt, or maybe worst of all, if you're stuck in a 30-year loan, jump out in front of that, get a better deal, go to SaveWithBruce.com.
Awesome, Conrad. Thank you very much.
Hey, man, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yep, no problem. Talk to you later, man.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.